Hello and welcome to Worldview. I am Emedion James. Coming up from Power Shift to Peace Talks, we take you around the world's top stories shaping global headlines. We begin today with Venezuela, where we can see a Venezuela opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, wins the Nobel Peace Prize, honored for her fight for democracy, even as U.S. President Donald Trump insists he deserves the recognition. In France, President Emmanuel Macron gathers the country's political parties in a bid to end a deepening crisis as the central bank warns of slowing economic growth. And in Gaza, a fragile ceasefire talks takes hold, Palestinians cautiously returning home after weeks of intense bombardment. Later in the program, my special report from Gaza, as we look at what the new peace deal really means for people underground. This is Worldview, bringing global stories into focus. Welcome back. This is Worldview. First on Worldview today is that Venezuela's opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, won the Nobel Peace Prize today for promoting democratic rights and fighting the dictatorship, receiving the award despite U.S. President Donald Trump's repeated statement he deserved it. Machado, a 58-year-old industrial engineer who lives in hiding, was blocked in 2024 by Venezuela's court from running for president and thus challenging President Nicolas Maduro, who has been in power since 2013. The Norwegian Nobel Committee said in its citation, "When authoritarians seize power, it is crucial to recognize courageous defenders of freedom who rise and resist." We move now to the Asian Pacific region, where a powerful earthquake of magnitude 7.4 struck offshore in the southern Philippines today, killing at least 2 people, while towns near the epicenter suffered structural damage and authorities warned of strong aftershocks. The quaking waters of the town of Manay in the province of Davao Oriental triggered a tsunami alert for coast within 300 kilometers, that is 186 miles of the epicenter. But the warnings for the Philippines and Indonesia were subsequently lifted. There were initial reports of damage to homes, buildings and bridges, when officials in Manay said, although the full extent of the damage in the Philippines were not immediately clear. At least 2 people were killed, civil defense officials Carlo Poto said by telephone, both in Mate City, close to where the quake struck. There were no other reports of casualties from Regional Disasters Office contacted by newsmen. Away from that, in Japan, Sane Takaichi's bid to become Japan's first female prime minister was thrown into doubt today when a ruling party's junior coalition partner quit. The Liberal Democratic Party, which has ruled Japan for almost all of the post-war era, selected hardline conservative Takaichi as its new head in the weekend's vote. But she must win approval in Parliament to become premier later this month. Following in a meeting with Takachi today, Comito leader Texo Santo said the two parties' 26 years partnership had broken down over the LDP's failure to respond to a political funding scandal that has dogged the ruling group for 2 years. He said Kamatos would not support Takachi in the parliament vote expected to be held in the second half of October. Takachi called Kamato's decision extremely regrettable, but said she would do whatever she could to win Parliament's backing. Still in the Asian-Pacific region, North Korea staged a military parade today to showcase its growing military might as leader Kim Jong-un declared the country's global standing was rising by the day at an event marking the founding of the ruling Workers' Party. Mirroring his visit last month to Beijing for China's World War II anniversary, Kim was flanked by the leaders of allies as he called his country a faithful member of socialist forces and a bulwark for independence against the threat of the West's global hegemony. Kim honored the legacy of the party that he said had made not a single mistake or error in its 80th-year history, leading the country on a path of asset riding on wisdom and strength of the people, state news agency KCNA said today. In a separate development, NATO's annual nuclear deterrence exercise, Steadfast Noon, will be hosted by the Netherlands and start next week, with 71 aircraft from 14 nations taking part, officials from the Western Military Alliance said today. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said that the exercise sends a clear signal to any potential adversary that they will and can protect and defend all allies against all threats. Rutte made his remarks in a video message recorded at Vulcan Air Base in the Netherlands, the main host of this year's drill. We move now to India, where India today upgraded ties with Afghanistan's Taliban administration, giving a boost to the diplomatically isolated group by announcing it will reopen its embassy in Kabul that was shut after the Taliban ceasefire in 2021. India closed the embassy following the withdrawal of US-led NATO forces from war-torn Afghanistan 4 years ago, though it launched a small mission in 2022 to facilitate trade, medical support, and humanitarian aid. About a dozen countries, including China, Russia, Iran, Pakistan, and Turkey, have embassies operating in Kabul, although Russia is the only country to have formally recognized the Taliban administration, whose members are under UN sanctions, including a travel ban and asset freeze. Elsewhere, Peru's Congress has voted to remove President Dina Boluarte from office hours after a late-night session was called to debate her impeachment. An overwhelming majority of lawmakers from across the political spectrum approved their outing on grounds of permanent moral incapacity. In an address on national television following the vote, Dina questioned the implication it would have on the stability of Peru's democracy. One of the world's most unpopular leaders with an approval rating of 2 to 4%. Lina's tenure has been plagued by frequent protests, scandals, and investigations, as well as a surge in gang violence. In a separate development, in France, President Emmanuel Macron will convene a meeting of France's mainstream political parties today ahead of a self-imposed deadline to name a new prime minister, as the country's central bank chief warned the political crisis was curbing growth. Macron is searching for his sixth prime minister in under 2 years and will need to find a personality whose appeal spans the center-right to center-left in order to steer a budget through a fragmented and fractured parliament. The president's office said late on Wednesday that he would name his next prime minister within 48 hours. The meeting, which does not include the far-right National Rally or the hard-left France Unbowed, two of the National Assembly's largest political parties, is due to take place from 12:30 GMT. Still in France, a court in southern France has increased by a year the jail term of the only man who challenged his conviction for raping Gaza'S. The 72-year-old retired grandmother was drugged unconscious by her then-husband Dominique for over a decade and raped by dozens of men he recruited on the internet. Hussein Dohen, aged 44, had argued he was innocent, despite graphic video footage shown in court for him penetrating a motionless Gaza'S. But the Court of Appeal in Nimes rejected his argument and extended his original 9-year jail term to 10 years. He was convicted of aggravated rape last December during a trial in which 50 other men were convicted. The prosecutor told the court Dohen had been unwilling to take responsibility for the massive act of destruction of a woman that had denied her humanity. Although Dohen was held in pre-trial detention ahead of last year's trial, he has not spent time in jail since. Still on court matters, New York Attorney General Letitia James has been criminally indicted on federal charges by a grand jury. According to court document, James, who led a civil fraud investigation against Trump in 2023, was indicted on charges of bank fraud in the Eastern District of Virginia in Alexandria. Prosecutors accused James of alleged bank fraud and making false statements to a financial institution regarding a mortgage loan for a house in Norfolk, Virginia. In a statement, James accused the president, who recently publicly pressured prosecutors to file criminal charges against her, of a desperate weaponization of the justice system. In Colombia, Colombian President Gustavo Petro has said that a boat recently bombed by the U.S. was Colombian with Colombian citizens inside, an allegation the White House called baseless. The U.S. has struck at least 4 vessels in the Caribbean in recent weeks, killing 21 people. The U.S. government has said the strikes in international waters were targeting narco-traffickers, but it has not provided evidence or details about who or what is abroad, and the strike had attracted condemnations in countries in the region amid concerns they breach international law. The U.S. Senate rejected a measure on Wednesday that would have barred President Donald Trump from using military force against the boat. We'll take a quick break right now. When we return, we'll turn the spotlight to the Middle East. Do stay joined to us for these and many more stories right after the breather. Many thanks for staying tuned. This is Worldview on Spectrum TV. Let's turn the spotlight to the Middle East, where Palestinians are beginning to return to Gaza's north as the Israeli military says a ceasefire is now in effect. Forces have pulled back to the lines agreed under the Trump plan, the IDF says, but will continue to remove any immediate threat. Hamas now has 72 hours to release all Israelis' hostages, while Israel will release hundreds of Palestinian detainees. Now, This comes after the Israeli government approved the first phase of Donald Trump's ceasefire and hostage release return deal. Once the deal is operating, aid trucks will surge in to help Gaza's 2 million people, most of whom have been displaced. The mood in Gaza this morning is a mixture of hope and fear as Israel begins its partial military withdrawal. Writes Gaza correspondent Rashid Adouf report. In this special report, we get to talk about everything that we need to know about the Gaza ceasefire deal. Israeli troops have begun withdrawing from parts of Gaza after the Israeli government approved the first phase of U.S. President Donald Trump's ceasefire and hostage release deal. Under the agreement, first unveiled by Trump last week on negotiations in Egypt, Israel now has 24 hours to withdraw to an agreed line within the Palestinian territory. Hamas will then have 72 hours to release all remaining Israeli hostages being held captive in Gaza, while Israel will release hundreds of Palestinian detainees. It comes just over 2 years after the Hamas-led attack on southern Israel on 7 October 2023, in which about 1,200 people were killed and 251 others taken hostage. This triggered a massive Israeli military offensive in Gaza, which has killed more than 67,100 people. Now, this is according to the territory's Hamas-run health ministry. Its figures are seen as accurate by the UN and other international bodies. What has been agreed upon in the peace deal? Now, the agreement has been formally approved by the Israeli cabinet. A ceasefire is meant to be in effect. The report overnight suggests Israeli airstrikes continued in some areas. Israeli ground forces have begun their withdrawal to an agreed line which, according to the spokesperson for the Prime Minister's office, would leave it in control of 53% of Gaza. A map distributed by the White House last week indicates that this will be the first of the 3 stages of Israeli withdrawal. The Israeli military said on Friday that troops were in the midst of adjusting operational positions. Once this withdrawal is complete, a 72-hour countdown will begin for Hamas to release all 20 hostages who are believed to still be alive. The return of the bodies of the 28 deceased hostages would follow, though it is unclear how long that could take. Israel would then release about 250 Palestinian prisoners serving life sentences in Israel jails and 1,700 detainees from Gaza, a Palestinian source told newsmen. Their identities are currently unclear, but a list submitted by Hamas before the agreement was reached included high-profile figures serving multiple life sentences for deadly attacks on Israelis. One of the most high-profile prisoners, Marwan Barghouti, will not be released as part of the swap, according to an Israeli spokesperson. Israel will also return the bodies of 15 Gazans from the remains of each Israeli hostage, according to Trump's plan. Hundreds of lorries carrying humanitarian aid would also start entering Gaza. A famine was declared in part of the territory for the first time back in August by UN-backed experts, who said that more than 500,000 people were facing catastrophic conditions characterized by starvation, destitution, and death. Israel has repeatedly denied that there is starvation in the territory. Trump's plan specified that 600 lorry loads will be delivered each day, but Palestinian sources said there would initially be a daily minimum of 400, with the number increasing gradually after that. According to a senior U.S. official, a multinational force of around 200 troops overseen by the U.S. military will monitor the Gaza ceasefire. The force's makeup is likely to include troops from Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates. The officials said their role would be to oversee and observe the ceasefire and make sure there is no violation or incursion. A second senior U.S. official said no U.S. forces will be on the ground in Gaza. The question on everybody's mind is, what happens next after the first phase of the peace plan deal? If completed, the first phase of Trump's 20-point plan would be followed by negotiations over the details of the later phases. But many of these points could be hard to reach an agreement on. The proposals, which you can read in full, says that it is agreed by both sides the war would immediately end. It says Gaza would be demilitarized and all military, terror and offensive infrastructure would be destroyed. It also says Gaza would be initially governed by a temporary transitional committee of Palestinian technocrats supervised by a board of peace headed and chaired by Trump and involving former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair. Governors of the trip would eventually be handed over to the Palestinian Authority, which administers the West Bank, once it has undergone reforms. Hamas, the armed group that has run the territory since 2007, will play no future role in its governance, directly or indirectly, according to the plan. Hamas members would be offered amnesty if they committed to peaceful coexistence, or would be provided safe passage to another country. No Palestinians would be forced to leave Gaza, and those who wish to leave would be free to return. A Trump economic development plan to rebuild and energize Gaza will be created by a panel of experts. Let's take a look at the sticking points over the later phases. There are likely to be multiple points of contention during the negotiations over later phases of the deal. This is a huge moment, but this is just the beginning. Hamas has previously refused to lay down its weapons, saying it would only do so once a Palestinian state had been established. The group also made no mention of disarming in its initial response to the plan last weekend, fueling speculation that its position had not changed. And though Israel has agreed to Trump's plan in full, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appeared to push back on the Palestinian Authority being involved in a post-war Gaza, even as he stood on a podium next to its president last week. Hamas has also said it expects to have some future role in Gaza as part of a unified Palestinian movement. Another sticking point is the extent of Israeli troop withdrawal. Israel says its first withdrawal will see it retaining control of around 53% of Gaza. The White House plan indicates further withdrawals to around 40% and then 15%. That final stage would be a security parameter that will remain until Gaza is properly secured from any resurgent terror threat. The wording here is vague and gives no clear timeline for full Israeli withdrawal, something Hamas is likely to want clarity on. Let's move now to the Palestinian people, where thousands of displaced Palestinians stream back towards their abandoned homes today after a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas went in effect and Israeli troops began pulling back from parts of Gaza. A massive column of displaced Gazans filed north through the dust towards Gaza City, the enclave's biggest urban area, which had been under attack just days ago in one of Israel's biggest offensives of the war. The Israeli military said the ceasefire agreement had been activated at noon local time. Israel's government ratified the ceasefire with Hamas in the early hours of Friday, clearing the way to partially pull back troops and fully suspend hostilities in Gaza within 24 hours. And last on Worldview today, large parts of Kiev were plunged into darkness today after Russian drones and missiles struck Ukrainian energy facilities, cutting power and water to homes and halting a key metro link across the Dnipro River. This is the latest mass attack targeting the energy system as winter approaches. Electricity was interrupted in 9 regions and around 600,000 households were temporarily without power across the country. A 7-year-old was killed when his home was hit in the southeast and at least 20 people were injured. An apartment block in the center of Kiev was damaged by a projectile, while on the left bank of the Dnipro that divides the capital, crowds waited at bus stops with the metro out of action and people filled water bottles at distribution points. And that's Worldview for today. From Venezuela's political awakening to France's power struggles and hopes of peace returning to Gaza, the world continues to search for balance, justice and stability. I am Emedion James. Thank you for watching. To catch up on this episode and other global stories, visit our website or follow us on social media platforms at Spectrum TV. From all of us here, thank you for joining us and stay informed.